So why don't we get started and welcome everyone to our January the 10th meeting. And why don't we start with introducing ourselves, and I'll just go around the screen on my screen. Bruce.
Bruce Nod, Maine Reentry Network.
Gordon.
Gordon Smith, the State's Director of Opioid Response.
Todd.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Brackett. I'm the sheriff in Lincoln County.
Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Blackwell Moore, she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Public Health for Cumberland County Public Health Department.
Kina. Courtney.
Hi, everybody. My name is Courtney Gary Allen. I use she, they pronouns. I am the organizing director for the Maine Recovery Advocacy Project and a person with living experience of substance use.
Great. Ella.
Hi, I'm Ella. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a legal assistant with the Maine Attorney General Office.
Haley.
Oops, sorry. Haley Tranko with the Attorney General's Office.
Brendan.
Hi, Brendan O'Neill, Assistant Attorney General with the Maine Attorney General's Office.
Great, thank you, everyone. And my name is Joe Everett, and I'm the President and CEO of the Opportunity Alliance and the chair of this committee. And welcome. Why don't we start with approving the November 28th meeting minutes? So procedurally, Haley, we're going to do a roll call.
Yes. And I have your voting sheets printed out somewhere.
So can we get a motion to approve the minutes? Gordon, second.
Sorry, who
I
made the motion?
I made the
Gordon.
motion, Haley, to approve the minutes.
Second, did I miss?
I seconded.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Okay, Haley, take it away.
Liz Blackwell Moore,
Yes,
Todd Brackett,
Yes.
Joe Everett,
Yes.
Courtney Gary Allen,
Yes.
Pat Kimball. I'll come back to her. Bruce Nodden,
Yes.
Miles Olette, Gordon Smith.
Yeah.
Kina Thakrar,
Yes.
Chastity Toole, Pat Kimball.
What am I voting on?
Approving the minutes from last meeting.
That's a yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
and Chastity let me know she is without power and internet.
Oh,
She
that's too bad.
be making today's meeting.
Oh, unfortunate. Okay, well, we're going to start. Brendan, we're going to give you a little time to talk about multi-year funding and such. So do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to take too much time. I'm also planning, although I haven't talked to Pat about this, to take a few minutes to talk tomorrow about this to the larger council meeting. I've got two things to talk about, but I'm happy to cut it down to one if we're taking too much time. The first thing is multi-year funding. The second thing is FOA and, trying to get the council's work done while still being compliant with FOA. Taking them in turn on multi-year funding, Haley did a really good job of asking the question of me, can the council commit second year funding if it's not the same council? So in other words, can this council bind a future council? For background, for anybody listening, this council's term is up in November. After that, it would be a different council, even if it's all the same members. And sort of the technical question is, as this committee has recommended to the full council, and as the full council has agreed, and I can't do much about being in the shadow here, I'm sorry. Certain of the funds that it has determined to distribute take place over 2 years. So some of the funding is 1 year, one-time funding. Some of the funding takes place this year and is proposed to also distribute a second chunk of money next year. and I take that to be calendar year. And so I looked into the question of, can this council promise a second year's worth of funding to those recipients? And I looked at the question in terms of both whether it's a new council next year or whether it's the same council. So in other words, if this council was in its first year of its 2-year term and decided to give out 2 years of funding, can I make a binding promise to recipients that they'll get funding in year 2? And just briefly, I've looked into this a bit. I've looked at some case law. I've looked at the state's sort of standard rider B that goes with contracts that certain contracts that it gives out. And the issue is, the short answer is, I think the council probably has, or what I would recommend is sort of 2 choices, or a choice of 2 options. The council can either, change its proposal so that it's 2 years, like in the case where it gave out 2 years worth of funding, either this year or next year, or let's just stick with that, to push that second year of funding into this year and to just give out 1 year's worth of funding. Kind of eliminates the issue. The other option is to say, in any notice inviting applications and in the application form, and then subsequently in the contract, that the recipient of the money is, sort of understanding that there's a risk that in the second year, a future council might make a decision that's different and may not give that, fully fund that year 2 contract. As I say, there are examples of this that I pull from. The background on these is that those examples contemplate when the legislature changes its mind. So, scenario is the legislature creates a program that's meant to go for a number of years. And in subsequent years, it says, either the same legislature or a different legislature says, we're not doing that anymore. And there's been cases about that. And the bottom line is, a legislature cannot bind a future legislature and, require that money go out. It's, because this is a new group, it's not really clear right now whether this group would be viewed under the same rules as applied to the legislature. However, in my mind, as I've advised you, and if you look at the MOU, this council's discretion about distributing funding is quite broad. It's, even if this council tried to, limit the ability of a future council or even the same council in terms of future years funding, it's not clear to me that would sufficiently limit, or that could sufficiently limit a future council's discretion. I'm going to pause there out of concern that I may be sort of omitting information or concepts, or maybe I backed into this or described it backwards. So I just want to pause there and see if anybody wants clarification or has questions.
So I have a question. Oops, I'm on mute.
No, you're not.
Mute. All right. So I have a question. So it's a little confusing to me. So if the council enters a 2-year agreement with an organization, you're saying because of our terms, the next one won't honor the contract or agreement we have with an agency? So for instance, if I use the example of the SSPs, the 17. So we're entering into a contract with them, or enter an amendment into a contract. So you're saying that we can't enter a multi-year that overlaps the term of the board? Or
So Pat, what I'm saying is that a future council may decide that it doesn't want to give that second year of funding. And things are pretty new with the council. There's a way to read the MOU in my mind that supports the idea that that future council has sufficient breadth of authority that it would not be obligated to send that second funding. What probably would happen is that there would be a lawsuit. There would be, based on breach of contract, and it creates a risk of, expenses and time and distraction, the outcome of which is unknown and unknowable. The case, a case that I've looked at involves the legislature in which that contract dispute failed on the part of the recipient of the money. And the defendant in that case was a state agency that was administering a program, legislated and allocated or appropriated by the legislature, and a later legislature changed its mind. This group is not a legislature, but it's possible that this group's authority and its MOU is sufficiently broad that that it might the outcome might be the same. But I think what I'm identifying, Pat, is that if a future legislature came to their legal counsel and said, we don't want to give this money anymore, can we terminate this contract, or just not the opioid crisis has shifted, we need to send this money somewhere else. I think there's a way to read the MOU that might permit that.
Gordon. Oh, you're on mute, Gordon.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I don't have and thank you, Brendan. I don't have a question. I have a comment and then a proposal to help move it along. And my comment is that if our terms expire in November, that's a good thing, because all the appointing authorities in November, to my knowledge, barring something highly unusual, would be the same: the governor, the attorney general, towns and cities, and the current legislative leadership. So I wouldn't honestly anticipate, I think I'd have a high expectation that the next council would honor our decisions. But recognizing what Brendan's saying, I think the easiest way to do it is to just give notice in our RFAs, RFPs, let people know that, and also put it in the contract. There's always, in every standard state contract with public funds, there are a bunch of contingencies. For instance, we would want to have in there that if they don't meet their expectations, if they don't meet their reporting obligations in year one, for instance, or maybe they go out of business, that we have the right to terminate the contract. So this would just be another condition in, well, hopefully it wouldn't be in a legal contractual document that would acknowledge that that a subsequent council, would have the right to make its own decisions regarding the second year funding. And I would propose that we make that recommendation to the council tomorrow and get on with the other agenda, only because we really got some important things to do. Not that this wasn't an important question, Brendan.
Courtney.
I agree with Gordon. I do think that this council doesn't have the authority to bind a future council, nor do I think I would want to as an individual councilor. I think that the reason why this council is special is that it does have the authority to make decisions with the information that it has before it for the future 18 years. But for now, I think we should just add it to the contract that's the way it's going to have to be. And I'm happy to make a motion to that, to recommend to the council that if it's helpful.
Seconded if it's helpful.
I'm not entirely sure whether a motion is required about this. I mean, we would just be, in developing the application form, whether it's a RFA, RFP, or some other vehicle, and then, reducing it to a contract to the winning contractor. I think we'd just be carrying it out on an administrative basis. If somebody else feels like we need to do this as a motion, happy to defer to you.
No, that's fine with me. I just was offering it if it was helpful to move it forward.
And I think we just let the full council know tomorrow that it has been discussed here, and Brendan, you can do the same. You can do your same, you can share the same and impart the same information, and we can speak to the fact that we've recommended that what was recommended.
And it's not really clear to me which group of the council is the right group to make this presentation to. I mean, obviously the full council, but this implicates the finance committee, it implicates your committee and so forth. So apologies for those who might be frustrated that I went first here.
No worries. It's important.
It belongs in both because this committee is the one that will be writing grants, and that kind of thing needs to be understood when you're proposing grant proposals. But it also belongs in finance because finance will be directly involved with the contract language and that. So it really belongs in both places, as well as the full council should be aware that that could happen, and that that's a responsibility. So for me, it belongs in both places.
Definitely. Okay, do you want to say the FOIA for tomorrow then, Brendan?
It's up to you, Joe. It's your agenda.
Maybe we should, just for the sake of time, we're down to like a little over an hour for the other conversation. Okay, so let's turn our attention to the picking up where we left off. Good job in December with the package that we put forth. So I'd kind of like to talk about next steps as it relates to the funding recommendations, or the funding that the buckets of funding that got approved, and sort of next step with each of those. And this is where I don't know, and I think we're going to need staff to sort of talk procedurally to Pat's point about sort of grants and such. So does it make sense to go through each one and talk about like next steps? What's Mary, like who are we to the work? Who's the department of jurisdiction that's going to manage it, et cetera, because we're not going to be, we have to pass the money through to their proper entity. So that was my hope for today. Were there other ideas of the conversation?
No, I think that's the right thing to do, Joe. And there were two meetings that I had with Ben and that we had with other state people that Ben's not on this committee. So, but Mary was at both of the meetings. Yeah. So she's got the notes from those meetings. I don't need to report for Ben, but they were very important discussions with respect to two of the items voted, maybe three.
So Mary, can you just lead that, what you learned, and Gordon, you can fill in the blanks. That would probably be really helpful. And go ahead, Brendan.
So I know we tried to avoid my FOA discussion, but we've just tripped into it. And I'll keep it very brief. The idea is basically there was this question of what's the maximum number of council members who could, do the council's work off screen, like outside of meetings, without triggering the public meeting requirement of FOA. And I've dug into it a little more. I'm continuing to dig into it. My read of it is, and I'm going to preview it here briefly and discuss it more tomorrow at Pat's discretion, that I'm going to take a different view that the council, to the extent like any of these meetings are going on that are doing anything of any procedural or substance import regarding getting the funds out, it's going to be super frustrating, but it does need to be done publicly, is going to be my recommendation. And that includes, meetings with, state agency staff about the procedures and the choices. As some of you know, the procedures often and the choices often result in changes in the outcomes and changes in who gets the money. And these are all things that really should be discussed publicly. I can go into more detail about this, but the reason I raised my hand was just to encourage Gordon and Mary and I think Liz has been having some of these conversations, and others who have been having these kind of, critical meetings to help the council's work move forward, to report as fully as possible at this time and in other meetings, as part of meeting the goals of FOA of transparency. And so that, I would encourage, speakers to include, discussions of not only kind of where things landed, but choices that were not choices that the things that people chose not to do, or not negative outcomes. I'm not being clear on that or articulate, but anyway, the more fulsome you can be in these reports, the better.
So that's really helpful, Brendan, for me. You kind of got to what I was concerned about and sort of the process. So I'll let Gordon go, and then we can sort of go back. I'll go ahead, Gordon.
So I'd say two things. Ben and I proceeded on the basis of the previous advice was that fewer than 3 members of the committee could meet and accomplish the business. And so we proceeded on that basis. We did not include more than 2 members of the committee. My second thing is a question, because Ben's really going to be concerned about this. So you're suggesting that if he, for instance, talks to his own staff about whether they are able to assist on this piece or that piece, that he has to notice that as a public meeting. Is that your advice?
I think to the extent I don't want to parse too much about which hat Ben would be wearing at that time, whether it's a Recovery Council hat or Deputy Commissioner hat. But to the extent that he is moving the council's business forward in a way that, could be outcome determinative about amounts, about process, about recipients, about how people will find out about applications, the content of applications, the form of applications. Those are all things that I think would be best done, if there are regularly scheduled council meetings or committee meetings that could be utilized for those kinds of discussions, that would be ideal. And Gordon, I want to acknowledge your first point. That was my previous advice in rereading FOA section 406, and then looking at the purposes of FOA. I think, and talking to other people internally, I think I need to, because there's a lot of money at stake here and a lot of work, be more, take a broader view of it.
Thank you, Brendan. Gordon, are you all set? Your hands, are you good? Your hands still raised.
I'm
Okay.
not all set, but I'm done. I'm done questioning.
You're done for now, because we're going to come back. So Pat and then Bruce.
So my question is quick. It's more of a comment. I get that the public, and I have no problem with the public being part of it. I will share with you my frustration on that is it's the 2-week notice to the public and how much notice the public has to have. It really restrains us from moving forward. A lot of times we're at a meeting and we'll say, gee, tomorrow, do you have 20 minutes and we can talk about that, to continue the conversation. This really, and again, I don't know what the solution is. I'm just saying what my frustration is. For me, this is just a frustration in regards to moving forward quickly with people on very busy schedules. So you take that opening when you get it. Like if Ben wants to talk to his staff about pushing things forward, he could include it in a regular staff meeting. But now you're saying, again, that's just my frustration, and we'll work through it. But that's sort of where I am with that. And again, we have to live by the law. I have no problem with the public being part of it. It's that blessed 2-week notice that's like making me a little crazy.
And Pat, I absolutely hear you. I share that frustration. I see and recognize the extent to which it slows down the council's work. You know, it's a priority item legally for the council, and I'm continuing to look at it and talk to others. And at this point, you know, that the council's in a different position than other agencies like HHS or quasi-state entities like Efficiency Maine that have staff that can do a lot of work. I'm not saying that's determinative legally, but I'm just saying that to the extent that you know, the council has a clear mandate to operate consistent with FOA in its work, and it does slow things down. There's no question.
Okay, Bruce.
You probably covered this way back when you went through FOA. But what about one-on-one conversations that we may be having?
With other council members?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
To the extent that you're talking about things like scheduling or agendas, I mean, agendas sort of gets to the close line, but scheduling doesn't. Like scheduling, you know, that would be fine to just handle administratively on the side. You know, even setting agendas is like, what are we going to talk about? But as importantly, what are we not going to talk about? Possibly that could be, you know, handled one-on-one. You know, the advice I've been given is like is essentially the more administrative and less programmatic it is, that tends to skew towards it being okay. I think in general, the way I think about it is, you know, to the extent any of the conversations are, you know, a lot of the conversations that are happening now are, you know, who needs to know about this opportunity, or what's the process through which we're going to get this money out the door, or, you know, what form are we going to use for an application, things like that. I mean, I think those are all things that the public and applicants would need to know about. And you know, in other agencies, I think there's a circumstance in which that gets, you know, put out there that would still be consistent with FOA. Here, I think it's a different standard.
So can I just, to move us along, sort of in terms of the process today, I think we're appointed to the council with wisdom and experience. So can we engage in the conversation of things we learned? We have the document laid out, how much we agreed to. We're now talking about the nuts and bolts. It'll all have to go back to the council, I'm sure, for a vote about how things go down. So Brendan, is that acceptable? That Gordon has been in this job 5 years. He knows a lot.
Yeah.
You know a lot. Mary knows, you know, what she knows. So can we go through, this is where the transparency comes in. I don't think anyone has, what people learned is not showing up today necessarily as a decision. It's sort of helping us to move our work. That was sort of my hope for today. So it's not that I talked to anyone about, oh, go do this work. I think people took their task seriously and went and learned. And I would love for us to be able to hear that learning today to inform us sort of by category of what our next steps could be. Part two, I think that we're going to need, and this is where we're not legislators and we don't, this is not our day-to-day job, but if we're going to get this money out the door, this group probably will need to meet more frequently than a monthly meeting, to Pat's point, so that we can do the 2-week notice. So that if we're not going to meet, we're going to need to get another 2 weeks in the book, because that means we're not going to get the money out quickly. So is that acceptable, Brendan, with FOA?
I mean, a fulsome reporting to this group, you know, in any kind of public meeting or already noticed public meeting, I think is great, and is a helpful thing to do for meetings that have already taken place.
Okay, so why
Does that
don't
answer the
we?
question, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not, I just feel like we're sharing what we learned today. So if anyone has anything else to contribute, I'm gonna help. Mary's sort of, this is her job, so she's going to, and Gordon, this is what you do. So if we could sort of start with harm reduction and how are we getting it out and what do we know? Do we have ideas about how we're gonna get the money out that we want to share today from all the group? But I'll ask Mary to start and Gordon.
Yes, we do have an idea of how the SSP contracts will begin. So Gordon and I were in a discussion with the CDC earlier this week to talk about what it would look like to add council funding to the current contracts as an amendment. And the next steps for us are to work on what that contract language specifically would look like with the input of the Attorney General's office, as well as the CDC and the council. My hope is to be able to reflect the intent of the council in the funding that was allocated and ensure that it reflects most accurately what was voted on and how the council wants the funds to be used. So those discussions are underway, and I have a contact person within the CDC who I can work with directly on that contract language. And my hope is, go ahead.
Go ahead, no, you keep going.
And my hope is to be able to present that to the council at the next full meeting in February for a final review and approval.
So back to you, Brendan. Do we need to have this conversation with CDC at a meeting publicly?
You're on mute.
Oh,
Yes.
so
I mean,
I think Mary, the next. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think to the extent we can, hijack committee meetings, it's sort of my language, I apologize, for those kinds of discussions and have, Gordon and I recognize this creates challenges, have administration staff participate in those conversations can happen. They just need to happen in a public meeting.
So maybe if we can schedule a meeting in 2 weeks, have CDC here, get that done. But is it okay for the team, this group, Mary and others, to work on that contract? So that we are sort of keeping up the conversation. So Mary, if you can work on the contract, then we can bring it forth. Courtney, go ahead.
I'm just curious if it would be helpful. It seems like this committee is going to have a lot of work to do and a lot of work that needs to happen in the public sphere. So I'm wondering if maybe we should just have a reoccurring bi-weekly meeting forever. Not forever, hopefully, but for a significant amount of time in the future.
Yes,
so that
I think you're
stack all those public meetings on the agendas, right?
Yep.
Same time, same place. See you in 2 weeks.
I agree.
Do you guys want to stick to Wednesdays, or do you want to, we were originally trying to meet the last Tuesday of the month, so we could also do the second Tuesday of the month and the last or fourth Tuesday of the month, or we can stick to Wednesdays if that works better for you guys.
Can you just hold up for a second, Gordon?
Yeah.
This might be related. His hand's up. So Gordon, go ahead.
No, I'd rather do the scheduling thing and then come back to me. I was
Okay.
just following up on the contracts and a couple of the nuanced issues that we'd be presenting tomorrow.
Okay. So what's the pleasure of the group? Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday afternoon?
We could also do Wednesday afternoon just for the purposes of getting a meeting in with like 2 weeks from today, and then switch back to Tuesdays in the future.
Does that work for folks?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, back to you, Gordon.
So number one, in both the meetings, there were no final decisions made. It was always anticipated that this was one possible roadmap to procurement, to getting the money out the door. There are others too, and it was always anticipated by Ben and I, the CDC and OBH, that these decisions would come back to the council tomorrow. among the things that will be reported is basically the availability without having to appropriate funds for the state staff to do this. You remember, we actually asked Ben to and asked whether the state would need money to assist us with this first tranche of funds when it appeared that the most efficient and appropriate way was to amend existing state contracts. And so he simply was doing what we asked him to do in his role as deputy commissioner. The staff was all, there were a lot of questions, but the staff was very cooperative and willing to assist Mary in developing this language. And so we would be offering to simply amend the contracts that support 17 sites that have been certified as of the end of the year. You'll remember we also voted $200,000 for additional new sites, and we, in the course of the hour, we just did not get there, and so we actually set that aside and said, well, let's talk about that on another occasion. But there will be an opportunity for, if we wish to take advantage of it, the state is willing to load this additional amount with appropriate language onto their existing contracts. Now, there's also discussions that have taken place between Ben and the Attorney General's office about the technical issues regarding moving the funds. And Brendan may be familiar with those discussions. I am not. So some of the things that were talked about at the two meetings, honestly, may be affected by subsequent conversations with Mark Toulouse, who is the financial officer in the Attorney General's office that has responsibility for the fund, so to speak. And a lot of this problem is the result of us not being able to transfer money directly from the Maine Recovery Fund to a department in state government. Now, Ben's got a number of ways to fix that, but it's the fact that we can't do that without a legislative resolve to do it. So we could do it, but not without a legislative action, and that's always problematical, but it's another option. So I think that's all I have to offer. On this really would be the first money we could get out the door if the council chooses to accept the state's offer to use the existing contracts. There are, how many organizations were there? 7 or 8 different organizations that operate those 17 sites. Mary, I forget the exact number, and there's 2 new proposals.
Yes, I don't remember the exact number of organizations. I do remember them mentioning at the end of December they had 2 proposals for new syringe program sites.
Right. The other things that were discussed, Joe, that are really important that would come back to the council is whether they would have to apply these 17 sites or whether they would simply be eligible and would be given an opportunity to opt out if they didn't want the additional funds in their contracts. And there's one other thing that will come to me, but that was primarily what I wanted to offer. We also still take the position that the Maine Recovery Funds are not state funds. They're a unique source of funds, that they're not state budgeted funds, which also means that prohibitions that might be in their existing contracts regarding the use of state funds would not apply to our funds. If we want to put restrictions on our funds, we council can do that. But you'll remember we really emphasize flexible funding, personnel, outreach, supplies, anything that's legal. I remember making those points. So that's where this stands right now. This was just a meeting to talk about, well, could we use the state's current apparatus so that we don't have to be out there with an RFI and RFP or something that's going to take months. This could be done pretty expeditiously, and I think it's the most important thing that we could do right now to save lives, frankly, and help people.
Thank you, Gordon. I agree, and that's recaps sort of, I think, where we landed in December, the vote of the council, that it's flexible and not putting people through sort of unnecessarily requirements. But Courtney, go ahead.
I'm just curious, has anyone chatted with Matt Dunlap to just double check that the auditors aren't going to be concerned about how this money is spent in the same way that they're currently concerned about the other state funding? I know that our intention is to be flexible, but I just want to make sure that that intention is actually able to be followed through with through the contracting process with the state.
Brendan may know, but I think you should ask that of Ben tomorrow. Ben will be with us tomorrow, and I think he's well equipped to answer that question. The other thing, Joe, by the way, that I forgot momentarily was that the issue comes up as we really anticipated in our discussion and our motion contemplated that each of the 17 sites would receive $75,000 a year for two years, the same amount. Now, when the CDC's process of funding, which spends about $1 million, it comes from the Prevention Treatment Fund, they have a formula that's not all the sites don't get the same amount of money. So, that could be a decision that the council reconsiders, but I believe that we contemplated what we passed, contemplated that each would get the same amount of money, and the CDC is comfortable with that.
I had one more question. My intention was that everybody would get the same amount of money. I'm happy to rediscuss that, but that was my intention when I voted. The other question I had, or I guess more of it's a comment, reflecting on the legislature having to give us some type of authority to pass money on to a state entity. I'd have to think about that more, but at first it gives me a lot of caution and pause because I just don't want all this money to be transferred for a future council to the DHHS. I don't know. It just gives me a lot of pause. So if there's a way to not do that, that would be great.
Joe, just real quick. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't know how to quickly raise my hand, and I'm not asking to be taught that right now. Courtney, as I understand, and Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand the issue, it's that the legislature would need to grant the authority to the state agency to accept the money. Like it's not about the Recovery Council's authority.
Okay, that gives me less pause.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
See, they've not. Commissioner Figueroa educated me about this. That the department, you see, in the budget, in the biennial budget that was passed, the Department of Human Services did not seek and was not given the right to receive monies from this fund, and so they'd really have to do that in order to the amendment. The budget would have to be amended. So that's what.
Okay, well, we must have an empty bill somewhere that if that's the only problem, we could get it passed pretty quickly with emergency preamble.
That's a great theme. It's a great theme, Courtney. I agree.
Okay, go ahead, Mary.
I wanted to quickly follow up on Courtney, your question. And Gordon, correct me if you think otherwise, but the impression I left our meeting with was that the flexible funding approved by the council would not run into issues or roadblocks in terms of the audit or controller's office process. I have on my list of things to do to reach out to Matt Dunlap, but that was raised at one point, and it did not seem at the time that it would be a major issue. Again, there was some follow-up that was going to happen, and folks are going to check with others, but I did want to mention that.
Thank you, Mary. So again, procedurally, our next meeting, and I hope we don't take 8 weeks to get through each bucket. I'd like to think that we can get a groove going. So we need probably Ben at the meeting. We need the CDC at the meeting if we're talking about the SSPs. Who else do we need at the meeting to sort of make the final mark in 2 weeks? Do we have everyone covered? I think just getting everyone on the Zoom so that we can move it forward without having to do follow-up. Is there any other folks that need to be at that meeting?
No, but
And
I
if
think
we're
we
able-
need to give Ben the opportunity. He might send Jeff Wiley instead.
Yeah.
Jeff was at both our meetings. I think
Yeah.
he works for Ben. He's the chief budget officer for DHHS. So again, Ben's full up, and so I worry about his ability to attend the meeting of grants committee, but he can certainly make sure that all the information that we need is available.
Perfect. And I think Brendan is good as long as they send a representative from the department we need, we're good, right? I mean, Ben's a council member, but in this instance, we're looking at requirements from CDC in this case, or
Yeah, I think-
OPH or the department.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, so if we were going to try to talk about at the next meeting, if we were going to try to tackle a couple of our initiatives, do we think we can do that in an hour and a half next time? And if so, what would we pick off the list and who would need to be in attendance to get that moved through as quick as possible?
The other ones that we're prepared to talk about tomorrow, Joe, would be the beds, the need to do an RFP or an RFA for the beds that we voted in for Franklin County and Androscoggin County, and the recovery center in Piscataquis County. There are documents that exist because the Office of Behavioral Health has obviously put out previous RFAs, RFPs for both recovery centers and beds. And so they are willing to assist us in using their people, their process, as much as we're comfortable with. And so that was the purpose of yesterday's meeting, just to see if the state Division of Contract Management, as well as program managers, the financial program officers, program financial officers, the PFOs, and all the people would be willing to help Mary. I mean, the state has dozens of people, honestly, to do what we need to do. And if we had to build this on our own, the infrastructure, it would take us years. So I hope that we'll be able to take advantage of the generous offer that the state has made to help us in any as much as possible. We realize there was a lot of discussion. Because I told them that the Recovery Council, I didn't think would be comfortable simply turning the entire process over to the Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Contract Management, as they, now that group has complete jurisdiction over the project in Washington County, the project in Kennebec County, because they found, thank goodness, state funds to support those activities. We can use as much of their expertise and processes as we wish, but there's going to have to be a public discussion at the council meeting about the extent to which we're comfortable, the council members are comfortable using all the processes, and yet the final decision rests with us and whether they will be comfortable with using all their processes and then just turning over the result to us to do whatever we want with. They're not necessarily quite there yet either. So, for instance, scoring. Now, I can tell you that I really anticipate, frankly, probably having a small number of applications in Franklin and Piscataquis and Androscoggin County. But if there are competing bids where people can appeal those decisions, of course, if they're not granted the award, then we have to have gone through a process that's defensible in terms of the scoring of those applications, if there are competing applications. So they have experts that score these things. Are we going to be willing to, do we want them to score our application? Or are we going to be willing to commit the kind of time that it takes for 15 of us or a subcommittee or whatever to do that scoring when we all have day jobs? This is their job. They are now in the process of a multi-day, almost multi-week process of scoring 22 applications for our recovery community centers, for instance. It's an enormously complicated, time-consuming process. So I'm just sharing that with you. I don't know what the answer is. Liz is very familiar with the process. Gordon is somewhat familiar with the process. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, we talked about, well, maybe they have 3 people score it, and we would have 3 people score it. And then we would make recommendations to the council. The one thing I think we would insist upon is that the council makes the final decision on who's getting that award. But if that's our ultimatum, so to speak, then the state might say, well, then we're not going to spend our time on it. If in fact we're not going to, because they would feel that they're trying to protect the integrity of their own process, where they put out the RFA for us, they get the applications, they score them, they give it to us, and we say, well, we're going to give the award to somebody else. So it's a fascinating question. We're a new group. I honestly think you have to take a deep breath, honestly, and just say, this is new. 50 states are dealing with similar questions. And we'll try to do our best to get at the right place. But that's why this is a little bit complicated.
Definitely. Thank you, Gordon. Pat?
So Gordon, I appreciate that, it is a complicated grant. Reviews and putting those out are complicated. For me, when I hear it, I think that there has to be some collaborative way. I mean, just getting a sense of who the council is, I think they'd want to be part of that process. And I also understand the state saying they're not comfortable with saying, I mean, ultimately, we have the final say. It's the council's funding. But the point is, I think we need to be part of the process somehow. And I think we can share with their expertise and figure that out. I can't imagine 15 council members wanting to be in on the scoring of that grant. But I can visualize that there would be some council members who'd want to be part of that process. That way it would be a collaborative piece versus just the state getting them, scoring them, saying these are our scores and this is who we're recommending and the council votes on them. I think there has to be a hybrid in here that includes the council in some of those process. But that's just, off the top of my head. I do understand what the state is saying. It's their reputation. It's their work. But I also see, and I hear the council loud and clear, they want to be part of that process from the very beginning. They don't want to just be at the end of it. So I think there's a way we can come up with a hybrid that will serve its purpose.
We need to use the infrastructure of the state of Maine, in my opinion. We're a council, we're not a government entity. So I think that was very helpful, Gordon. I agree with you, Pat. I think we're required to do a transparent process. I think we need to bring in the right players and let this sort of happen real time in this meeting. So making sure that, to the detox facility RFPs, if we think we can get that in next time, we can identify who needs to be at the meeting so we can talk this through all the way from scoring to, because there's then when awards are granted, there's a whole management compliance process that has to be in place that we also don't have. I mean, Mary, that's not what Mary's job is. I don't think Mary, to sort of be the compliance officer for the contractees. So I believe we have to sort of be in partnership with the state, but I think per this work and per FOA, we need to sort of have it happening in this meeting publicly. So again, back to Gordon and Mary, who should we invite to sort of accomplish what you just laid out, Gordon, to the next meeting?
One additional person is Jim Lapatowski, who is the director of the Division of Contract Management within DHHS. So it's his group that actually manages the process of putting out an RFP or an RFA. And so, for instance, the Washington County project was an RFA, which means they could fund more than one project. The Kennebec County was an RFP, which anticipates only one award. So even the process of, well, do we do an RFP or an RFA? That's something we'd have to work collaboratively with the state as we try to meet our intentions of what we voted on with respect to those beds in Franklin and Androscoggin County. So Lapatowski would be one. And I think Director Squirrel or someone, her delegate would be another, because then, I mean, it's her program officers that actually put the language together that then goes to contract management. So somebody from the Division of Contract Management, which is within HHS, it's not within the Office of Behavioral Health, and then Director Squirrel's direction, somebody from her shop, probably Adrian Leahy, the COO there. I think those are the primary people that we were involved with yesterday that I think we could redo the discussion, because as I say, no decisions were made.
Like, that's great. Okay, Courtney.
So I'm asking this question because I'm legitimately confused. So I'm just hoping somebody can help me understand. I'm wondering, does it have to be this complicated? Like, can it be more simple? And what I'm referencing is Franklin County put together a Google form and asked people to apply for their money and accepted applications and then picked applications and sent them a check. I guess I'm like stuck on this. Why do we have to have RFAs and RFPs and use state contracting? I don't know. Can someone just help me understand?
Yeah, well, I think Brendan can, but I think I can too, Courtney, because even in Franklin County, they scored those applications. And in our case, where we're dealing with more money, and the mere fact that an unsuccessful applicant could appeal in and of itself means that we have to have a process of using these public dollars for, in a very transparent way when we're dealing with potentially competing applications. Now, there is a state process in the state where they can sole source a contract at times when you can demonstrate that this is the only entity that's appropriate or capable of doing this work, and maybe there's an exigency with respect to time. So there are sole source contracts. So I think every day about, does it need to be this complicated? Because it's taken me 5 years to even adjust to the fact that it takes so long to accomplish these things. But honestly, there's not many shortcuts when you're dealing about public money and a competitive process. Brendan, correct me if I've misstated something, please.
Franklin County and the subdivisions are different because they don't have an MOU or rules that sort of govern how they give out their money. It only governs what they can use it for. So they can establish their own process and do whatever they do, things however they want. The council has a lot of leeway also to do that. It could decide to, as Gordon describes, kind of sole source a chunk of change. It doesn't necessarily have to follow, or it has more discretion to be more flexible than the state can be when it comes to making decisions like sole sourcing or other things. Here, as I understand it, this group was trying to be speedy and rely on an existing process rather than recreate something to, as I understand it, there's already information in the system about these facilities or these potential recipients. And I thought the point here was, let's use the existing system, let's use the existing people who already know, who've just been through this process for, I think it was Washington County, and do it that way. I mean, there's no doubt that like we're running into complications between like, can the recovery fund be transferred to HHS to just let them do all the work? And then there's a question of the council being comfortable with them doing all the work and so forth. So to some degree, this is sort of a policy choice of the council. And Gordon, tell, or Joe, tell me if I'm misstating the history here, but I think this was meant to take advantage of existing knowledge, existing systems as a way to try to get the money out quickly.
Well, that's what we asked Ben to, and Ben made for, and we knew that the state has the expertise and dozens of people that do this every day, and we want to the extent that the Recovery Council's comfortable with it, they've generously made all that apparatus available to us without cost, without us, without them taking a small portion of our funds to cover this. At least with respect to these initial projects. I do think, Courtney, that there's other projects that in the future that will be different than these projects, that we might say, we'd like to see applications for improving medication in the jails. Please, if you are, send in applications. So the fact that we're doing this now does not mean that we're wedded to this kind of process for all of our projects. These projects are fairly complicated because even if we took the position, for instance, that, well, we're just not going to use the state, we don't trust them, they take too long, we're going to do this ourselves. We would immediately, because of the beds are only sustainable in the long because of Maine Care, and they have to be licensed by the Division of Licensing and Certification, and they have contracts with the Office of Behavioral Health to deal with the uninsured. So they would immediately, whoever we give the award to, they're immediately, have to be dealing with 3 state offices. And likewise, with respect to the syringes, we've already said to the syringe service providers that we're only interested in helping them if they are a certified exchange. And there's a set of rules at the CDC that actually tie back to a statute that regulate all that. So we may end up doing some things that don't have that level of state regulation that this process we wouldn't be dealing with RFAs and RFPs potentially.
Okay, thank you. Just for the record, I'm not dissenting. I was really seeking to understand and things.
Okay, Pat, your hand's up.
So mine was just quickly more what Gordon had said, that I think there's a way to simplify things. I think once we get moving and grooving, that we can have what we would prefer to either like mini grants or something that would be able to just award small organizations with, some startup funds. I think about a film writer wrote me the other day in regards to the council money and about a film that he wanted to do. He's asking for very little money. Those are not complicated things. And if we could have an application process and a system to put things through like that, the things that we're talking about in this first round, I have to agree, with Gordon, we're talking detox beds and SSPs, and these are, we have to think about public safety and where the funds are going and how that we in regards to public safety. But I think this committee can do both. I think that we can, again, once we get moving and grooving with this bigger piece, look at smaller mini grants that will be able to help our community in great ways that are simple process. We look at it, we prove it, and then we leave them a check. But the other piece is we have one staff member. And that's what we always have to consider, is because we have to keep track of all of this and where it goes, we have one staff member. So that's something in the future.
Well, and and I know we're getting short on time, but I really had hoped to, Todd has vocalized sort of the need to sort of get money out to communities. And I think, Pat, in the spirit of what you're saying, that's an important conversation too, how that's going to happen, because that might be low hanging fruit, not to put words in your mouth, Pat, but I think that's also an important conversation that might be less intense than what we're talking about. But just keep it going, Brendan.
Just real quick, in terms of, the FOA requirements and in trying to kind of streamline and move things along more quickly, and this is partly for Gordon. Gordon, as you know, and the others don't know, I participated in the meeting with the HHS contracting folks that you described, and it was, a helpful conversation. It was also sort of as these conversations tend to be, sort of brainstorming. How can we do this thing? Can we do it this way? Can we do it that way? And I wonder whether the council could and still be compliant with FOA instead of inviting that conversation to happen at the council level, whether it could pose a question to an agency and ask how, could you make a proposal to the council about how you would carry out this task that we're interested in having you do. And then instead of having a whole team of people, engage in a brainstorming session at the council, I wonder whether we could have somebody come in, say a director Squirrel, or say the gentleman whose name I forget, who is the director of contracting. Yeah. Whether, somebody could come in and make a presentation to the council saying, we propose to, run the process for the new, 2 new detox facility applications the following way. And then the council can probe and ask questions and, ask for input and ask for, clarification on things. I wonder if that would move things along.
I think that's an excellent idea. And I think Sarah and we got partway to that yesterday, really, with Sarah and Jim Lapatowski, Ben or Jeff. I think that's a wonderful way it's hard to envision the whole group coming into the council meeting and us having to have all these discussions, as part of the council meeting. So, I think that's good.
So I think what would be critical is coming up with the question to ask them and having it transmitted to them, perhaps by Mary, or, perhaps by Pat. And Gordon, you can identify the right person who it should go to, and have the department or the CDC or whoever in the future it would be, deliberate amongst themselves about what they're prepared to do to help the council, and then bring that proposal back and be prepared to field questions from the council about it. The one, and Gordon, I reckon, and Pat and everybody else, I recognize this won't sit well. The part that I think is important, though, is that council members should not participate in those discussions, including people who are part of those agencies or in the administration.
Well, that's really just Ben. I think that's just Ben and I think.
I think that's right.
I don't think that's a problem, really. I mean, or I think if we did participate, then we'd have to recuse ourselves from other parts of the process. But I do think that I'd be happy to help Mary with that question, because I think it's quite straightforward. It would be along the lines of, thank you for offering the services of the state's infrastructure for, getting these types of projects out to the public and looking at applications. And how would you propose to do that in a way that provides fidelity to your process, at the same time acknowledging that the council is going to have the final decision on who is awarded these funds? How do you propose to do that? That would get into, and I anticipate their answer would get into, well, let's jointly score them. Let's have 3 people from our team and 3 people from our team be part of the scoring, something like that. And we don't even know, as Brendan well knows, that whether we can score these competing applications without it being a public process under FOIA. We do not know that yet, unless Brendan has an answer from yesterday.
I know what my instinct is.
Right. Your instinct would seem to be that we'd have to do it as part of a public process. And at the same time, we can protect trade secrets. There aren't many among nonprofits, frankly. So but see, that's completely foreign to how DHHS deals with its scoring process.
Okay, Todd, then Liz. Oh, we can't hear you, Todd.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yep.
Sorry about that. I'm just a little confused. Really just a clarifying question. So are we talking about, we're talking about involving the state with, and specifically the CDC and their expertise around the harm reduction funds? Are you talking about dispersing the whole amount that was that's in the spreadsheet? You know what I mean? That the council approved. And if it's the first, again, I'm a little bit confused. I mean, if we've decided that we're gonna put out, other than what to do with the $200,000 and who may get that, the part that you weren't able to get to, I understand, Gordon. The rest of it seems pretty clear to me. If everybody's just going to get $75,000 a year, you know what I mean? Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. I'm not opposed to the process. I'm just trying to understand, are we talking beyond those harm reduction funds? Are you talking just about the harm reduction funds?
The answer to your question, we're talking about kind of 3 distinct things. Using the CDC because of just what was voted on the SSPs, because they regulate them and they have the existing contracts. If we were not to, what's complicated is that if we didn't use their existing contracts, then we'd have to do a contract from the Maine Recovery Council or the Maine Attorney General's office with each of those 8 providers that run those 17 sites. Those would have to be negotiated. They'd have to be executed. It would take a lot longer. So we'd like to just load this money with appropriate language into their existing things. Similarly, we immediately thought about the Division of Contract Management and HHS when we thought about the new beds, because they just put out an RFA for Washington County for 10 beds. Same thing as we're trying to do in those 2 other counties. So we're just borrowing their expertise. And likewise, with respect to the recovery centers, they've done lots of RFPs on recovery centers, and this would be a fairly simple one for Piscataquis County. Not the whole spreadsheet, God help, just these particular projects, because this seemed to be the best way to get to procurement in a legal and competitive, transparent way.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, Liz.
I'm just wondering if we can invite them to come to this meeting in 2 weeks, and have that conversation here so that they can then go back with any of the comments that we have, and then be able to come to the next council meeting with, like, that we could then be voting on something, instead of, if they come to the council meeting in a month and we have sessions, then it's another month until we vote on that. So if they could come here to have the conversation, it's a program and grants conversation. It seems like that might make sense. And I'd also be happy to share some of the stuff that was talked about in the prevention space, because I think we do also need, we don't have to go into great detail today, but I do think we're going to need to invite people to come. They don't, there's so many unanswered questions about what it is we were even, how much money, and there's a whole bunch of unanswered questions that I think the council needs to deliberate on. And so maybe we put that on the agenda for next time, but we invite them to come to deliberate on it with them, because there's just a million, the conversations we had were really just about like, what do you think you all could be using the money, like trying to get a sense of that the council asked for them to do things, but now what? Like they should come up with a proposal for how they might want to spend out that money to do the prevention work that I think we were asking of them.
You mean Peter Alpha Foundation and Opportunity Alliance?
And Maine Youth Action Network, yeah.
Through always. Sure.
Yeah.
No, I agree. That is the way to do it.
But I think we also then need to invite Ian Yaffe as well, probably, if we're gonna do the family flexible funding for families that could feasibly come, but we don't even know anything there because no one's had a conversation with the Department of Family Independence to see how that would even happen, or if they do that, or like we have to figure that out.
So can I just, and procedurally again, so Brandon, what you're suggesting, and Gordon, I think, is that next time CDC they have our information, or Mary gives them a few questions, they would come back and propose, and we'd say yay or nay. And the same for OBH. I mean, that sounds great. And to Liz, to your point, that moves it. They propose something, we like it, we work through it. We might be able to wrap those two up. Is that what I'm hearing?
I guess I'm suggesting that we might have a back and forth with them that requires them to prepare something different for the council. Like if they come to a council meeting in a month and we don't like exactly what's there and ask for and have a conversation back and forth with them, then we're voting on it in March, not in February. But if they come to this meeting and we have a back and forth with them about some of the things they propose, we ask questions, that gives them 2 weeks to come back to the council meeting with something we've had a conversation. I don't know. I'm just asking for us to.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
I don't want this to go till March. Like if we could have it done in February.
Right. Okay, Brendan, then Bruce.
Just
briefly,
that the grants committee agrees to this, that they heard it and they agree. So it's not cold, that you already have a group that agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brendan, then Bruce.
Liz, just real quick, I guess it would be ideal if you feel like you can, send a question or questions to them that really focuses that conversation. I don't know if that's even possible.
And why can we not have a conversation with them? Like, why can't we have a conversation in public forum?
Oh, you can. Absolutely. I was just, my suggestion, doing it this way. I mean, you could do it either way or neither way, I suppose. Well, you have to do it publicly. But I was just trying to help streamline things. So if you want to have a more broad conversation with them, you absolutely can. I was just trying to
have the question. I understand that. I'm trying to get at what's legal and what can we do to move things along. And so I like the idea. I'm not opposed to the question idea. I'm just saying procedurally, if we could do it in this meeting in 2 weeks, it sets us up for February being able to have a vote at the council and move it along.
And I was just trying to I was just trying to put parameters around the discussion to keep it, focused, if that's what this group wants. But it's up to you guys.
So Liz, just to be clear, do you think, are you talking about the 4 categories or prevention?
No, I was talking about the state coming to talk about the harm reduction ones.
Yeah, so I think that have them come, we talk, we need to gather more information, but we can make a decision at the February council meeting. I was thinking, I'll let you speak, Bruce, that we may need, the program conversation tomorrow might need to be about prevention. I don't think that's clear enough for the council, Liz, maybe we could use our time tomorrow to talk about prevention and what we have in mind for that work. Do you think we need to do that, or that would be beneficial? And then we could send those whoever we identify, maybe even at the council, we could send them questions to be deliberating and then get that moving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we have the 2 entities that we said we were going to fund, and they have no idea how much money for each of them. There was discussion that it was going to be based on how many organizations they are serving, but we didn't come to that conclusion. So there's no funding amount. I would also say there's like, what can the money be used for? What about indirect? What about if they want to propose how the money should be used in a way that they feel like should be the best for prevention, like in the best use of their funds to support those organizations? I think the conversation we were having was really like, what do you all think is the best way to use this funding to bolster and support the work that these organizations are doing? And they were like, we need to go talk to our organizations that we support and work with. And that seemed like, yeah, that makes sense. So it was like, and can you come with a proposal, like come start generating some proposals that could be then presented to the council as like, this is what we think the work should be for that 1.5 million. So there was really no decisions and no nothing. And we were just like, there's not a lot of guidance here. So what do you all think you could do? So that was the nature of the conversations that Mary and I had with them.
So Pat, Madam Chair, does that make sense to bring that back to the council under this to sort of put a little more substance to that? And Liz, I think you have the substance in your head, but I think the first two, I think we're getting nailed down to having a meeting in 2 weeks, but the prevention bucket may need more conversation. We've decided, but now more meat on the bone, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that Liz has a valid point, and I think if I'm hearing right, one of the things is that we go to them and say, we have this funding for you under our parameters in regards to the opiate settlement dollars. Where do you see it best spent? Let them make a proposal to us, and then we look at this proposal and say, yes, it does, no, it doesn't. Rather than the opposite of us doing all the work to say what we want, let's ask them what their needs are, and we can see if it fits within the parameters of the abatement money funds.
Okay, great. So procedurally, we're good to do. Are we in agreement, the group, that we're ready to reach out to those groups? We're good to go. We can start that ball rolling. Everyone?
That's what we voted. I think consistent with what we voted, Joe. Yeah, and
Perfect.
it needs more meat on the bones. I agree with that too.
Okay, great. Okay, Bruce, sorry, I cut you off.
That's okay. I just thought that the original intention of what Brendan brought forward was to get answers so that they would come back in 2 weeks. I thought that was the idea from the start. The other thing is that I'm a little bit confused about Piscataquis County. We had intended that money for a particular organization who had been doing volunteer work and had a cafe and the whole thing. And then now we're saying we're sending out an RFP. That wasn't what we had intended.
Well, we can talk about that tomorrow, Bruce. I mean, I think that if you want to move to a sole source, that's a different process. What we did was say that for the only county that didn't have one, let's do $350,000 to let them get one started and make that money available as total over the 2 years, because we knew from what the testimony that the two individuals had given at the public hearing that there was a building available. They could buy it and wanted to operate it. They have a nonprofit, but I didn't anticipate. I still thought that it would be fairer to do an RFA, perhaps not. Well,
It's just,
Gordon,
I'm
it
sorry.
doesn't matter to me whether if you want to move tomorrow to sole source that, Brendan can do some work on. We all can on how we might be able to do that. We probably have the legal authority to do it.
And I'm not an attorney, but it feels so, like we talked about it as a sole source. We were talking about this particular group of people. They had identified a property and we were moving forward with helping these folks. Courtney had this, idea of, they need the money for the property, but they also need additional funding so that they can pay staff. And so in my head, we had envisioned these folks that presented in front of us as the people that were going to get the funds.
Gordon, don't they already have a contract with you? Don't
They have
use
a contract with, to run the cafe, thing that expires in June and is not expected to be renewed. It really hasn't worked out the way that either they or the state hoped that they would.
So it's not like you could extend that contract to
No, it's
include
really a
this.
different, it's really, it was a different approach, not a bricks and mortar recovery center. And I think both Mike Freisinger and I thought it was best to just let that expire and do this instead.
Because I hear Bruce loud and clear, and I was just thought that if there was an existing contract, we would say, well, it's an existing contract and we're adding on to that contract. But
Well,
it
we
doesn't-
can, it shouldn't be my decision unilaterally. I'll talk to Freisinger about that, and we consider that, we know what our intention was. We know the money that we want to put into it. This is just about procurement. How do we get from point A to point B? So let me give a little thought to that before tomorrow's meeting.
Real quick,
And
I'm just
Gordon, do
wondering-
we, oh, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off, and then Liz.
Joe. I'm just wondering, would it make sense to do the same process that we're talking about doing with the youth organizations with this particular, I don't know what they're called, people in Piscataquis County who are doing this work, tell them that we have this money for them and we want to know what they want to do with it, and they can come to us and tell us what they want to do with it? Because it almost sounds like it just sounds like it could be the same process as the youth serving organizations.
I guess, Courtney, I envisioned that they were going to kind of follow the model of other, recovery community centers, and that they would be held to the kind of the same standards that OBH holds other recovery community centers to. Same reporting, the same, all of the same, but that they would be receiving this funding so that they could get started. That's just the way I heard it and saw it.
Well, and not to be bureaucratic, but I think we're in the same kind of conversation we are with the detox beds. The contract would be with OBH, correct, Gordon? I mean, I think we're not a contract. So the contract with this Piscataquis organization, I thought we talked about it being similar, like to Bruce said, they follow the same standards, but we're not. Who would hold the contract? I thought it was going to be OBH. It would be the AG's office with Piscataquis.
I think we anticipated it would be the same contracts that we have with the other 22 applications that are pending before OBH, frankly, so that everybody would be in the same cycle. Eventually, this is why we put out a big RFA for those, and 22 applications came in, because we wanted to kind of put them on uniform, cycle, and uniform reporting and stat. We do collect data on recovery capital and things. So yeah, I think that in this case, that's what we anticipate. And I'll try to come in with something a little more concrete that would make sense to get the money out the door. I want to talk to Freisinger, and yeah, you make a great point, Bruce, that maybe this one really is something that we could justify a sole source contract.
I think in terms of what you've said earlier throughout the meeting, Gordon, and in past meetings about sustainability, like we're not going to sustain the project. So I think we do need to get them in sync with other centers, because we're funding for a couple of years this cycle, but we won't be an ongoing funder. So I think it's the same process of getting OBH to tell us what they propose. And then maybe it could be sole source, but I think there's a movement happening that the state's leading that we want this group to be part of, I believe.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that I do think that we also, if in the meantime, we can be creating our own, some version of our own contract and processes, because there are organizations and things we're going to want to fund that are not going to have state contracts. I mean, for instance, Peter Alfond Foundation does not have an existing contract. So we are in a position with them where there is no existing contract. So we have to come up with the way we're going to do that. So I do think and there'll be plenty of others, and that maybe in the future, it's easier for us to fund an organization and then say, hey, and in the future, you should then apply for, we fund you up front. And now your sustainable funding is by applying through OBH to be one of those centers so that we can do some things and not have to always rely on the state. I mean, I know lots of, with the ARPA money, people figured out how to create contracts and ways of applying for the funding and ways of communicating it in a pretty short period of time. And we have one person who runs $57 million through her one person office with tons of different, and I'm not saying it's not hard, I'm just saying it's possible. And she figured it out in a year, and now there's tons of money rolling out, and it has to all be spent by 2026. So I just hope we parallel process this, not to put it all on Mary, but I think there's a way for us to be thinking about both these things at once.
No, and I like that. I mean, I see the world that way too. I think it's both and sort of getting money in the hands of organizations to have the impact we need and want. Okay, so we're at sort of time. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Pat, Madam Chair, how would you like this conversation to show up tomorrow?
I'm going to leave that to you, Joe.
Okay, great.
I'm going to give you a piece of the agenda and you will report out on the committee, and I trust you will reflect what we did in the past hour and a half.
Okay, perfect.
Joe,
and then Brendan, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I sent you a draft agenda for a meeting on the 24th. I'll have to notice that before 5 o'clock. So if you could just write me a quick email and let me know what you want the items to say, and then I'll post it to the website. Perfect.
Well, I'll do that right now when we're finished. And then Brendan, you'll do your part tomorrow that'll tee up this sort of more complicated, you'll deal with the complicated aspect of our work.
Yep.
And Joe, we also, in the other buckets, in the treatment bucket, we had talked about outpatient buprenorphine. I've got some information on that. We also have just touched on the recovery support piece. So if you need a filler tomorrow for those 3 hours, believe me, there's a lot more to talk about in terms of our second priorities in each of those buckets, and sometimes rounding out the first priority. So I still think that I'm hoping that we won't completely spend all our time on procurement on what we've already voted, that we can start thinking about what we've still got left in the till, so we can at least be thinking in the future about that.
Thank you, Gordon, for that. And I think it's really important that let's keep moving this forward, and then sort of procedurally, again, my new favorite word, it's sort of where it comes in the door first, because I do think we need to talk about low barrier shelters. They're struggling financially. Yeah. And where does that conversation show up? And it probably makes sense for it to show up at council first and then come to us. And then I'd love for Gordon, for you to talk about what's happening with Macaulay residences and that work and what they're doing, because I think we all know women with children have a lot of needs and often go with their needs unmet. So it would be great to sort of learn more about what Northern Light's doing with their projects, opening more Macaulay residences. It's an amazing program. So I think it would be great. That's my hope too, to talk more about all the other work going on as well.
Yeah, and if that's not enough, that I've been thinking about on the outpatient buprenorphine, that I'd like to focus on the special populations, like the individuals who are incarcerated, and the jails aren't treating enough people because they don't have sufficient money for the medication. So all good things to think about. We still have a little money, and look forward to tomorrow's meeting.
To add on to that, I'll also be sending materials out before the meeting with proposals we've received in the last month from other organizations, either just notifying us with requests for support or funding specifically. So.
And she has some interesting things to share with you about medication in the jails from what she's learning from the municipalities. But I'll leave that to Mary to report tomorrow on that.
Great.
Also, we talked a lot about transportation and we talked a lot about little organizations getting money. So I think there's like a lot of different ideas that still need to be discussed.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll have a jammed packed agenda for tomorrow as well. But thank you, everyone. Great conversation. Thanks for the maximum participation, and we will move forward. And I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you all. Have a good
Bye.
evening. Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Everyone.